Okay. Hi everybody. Thanks for coming out. We are talking about Drupal's spring cleaning today, and just want to do a quick thanks for the sponsors. Hit the red button so we know it's recording. Something about me, Steve Stapleton. I work at Coldfront Labs. I've been working there for about 3 years now, and we're going to talk about update hooks and how to clean up some technical debt in websites. So first, we'll start talking about the problem and why this matters. What is technical debt and why do we want to clean it up? So the idea is that when you add more and more code, eventually the cost of a new feature becomes higher because it becomes more and more difficult to change that code if your code is dependent on each other. So the idea is that by reducing technical debt, for example, viewing multiple steps throughout a process to publish content, automating that or removing parts that may not be necessary will improve time because we can publish content faster, reduces the amount of maintenance because oftentimes more than not when you're restructuring your site, then there's code you find that no longer is needed. Improves site performance as well, since if you can remove some content you're not using or restructure it in a more efficient way, then some queries run faster because there's less data. So what's the difference between a migration and an update hook? Migrations are the idea of you're basically moving a site from one area to another. So for example, you might be migrating from Excel sheets if you wanted to, or you could be migrating from WordPress or something else like that. So the idea is that when do you want to use update hooks? When do you want to use migrations? An example of when you'd use a migration would be the jump between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. Whereas an update hook is more about running code when your module gets installed so that you can go and make certain changes. Whereas an update hook will be a lot quicker to do because it's not a full-blown site. You're just doing your specific update hook that does one specific thing. So before doing update hooks, one of the things that is in the Drupal user guide online is this Drupal spec sheet. So it's a great way to just take inventory of your site, see what's going, what the structure is and where it can be improved and what changes you want to make. So by going through your Drupal spec sheet, taking inventory of your site, you can then decide, it'd be easier if we can remove this content type or restructure it in this way. So we'll talk about some certain examples. Here's a simple update hook. The general idea with an update hook is that it's going to be the module name _update and then a number. The number usually starts with the main Drupal version that you have. So for example, if you're doing Drupal 10, you'd start the number with 10.0.0.1, for example. If it's Drupal 11, you do 11.0.0.1. In an update hook, it's basically just running code. An update hook runs only one time. There's a version stored in your site for that module. So if you run an update hook and then you try to run your update hooks again, it's not going to run. So the general naming convention is the module _update _major version and the version number after that. So we'll talk about the different sections of an update hook and what you can do. So the first part we're talking about is loading data. With loading data, there's something called an entity type manager. And with the entity type manager, we can get storage handles to allow us to load data. So for example, if we want to load a node, we can load the node storage. If we want to load media items, we can do media items. One of the examples that we look at a little further on is converting files to media items. So you might have files in your site, but you may not be using the media module. So if you have the entity type ID, you can load the storage handle to go and load data for that. So here we have an example. So we have the entity type manager that we go and get. We have the entity type ID. And then using get storage, we get the node storage handle. And then here we just have an array of IDs. And then we can load those nodes based off of those node IDs. So here's an example when we might want to map fields on the same content type. So we do the same thing. We load the data. You can see at the beginning we get the node IDs, and then we load the node objects themselves. we iterate over it, and here we check if the field has a value. If it has a value, we get the field, we update the value we want, and then after all that is done, we go and we save the node. So when we talk about converting files to media items, there's several steps that we would need to do. The first step is creating the media items from the files, and we'll look at how we can get the file IDs from the database. The next step is going to be actually going through where the media items are being used and then updating that field so the media items are now being used instead of the files. So the first step here, we talk about creating media items. Here we have a get query, which basically gets all the field, the FIDs from the files, so we get all the file IDs. In more recent versions of Drupal, it's required that you add an access check. And then once we have the file IDs, we can then go and use the file storage to load the files. So here we have an example of creating a media item. The files are going to have a MIME type, and basically what you see in this example here is we check the MIME type and decide what version or what we want to do with that. So the file could be an image, it could be a document, it could be a text file. So when we look at the MIME type, we can say, okay, we want this to be a media item that's a document, or we want this media item to be an image. So if you can see here, we do if file MIME is equal to application PDF, and then we create the media item. The bundle is going to be the media type, so in this case document, and then we take the information from the file and then we add it in there. And then you can see we have the field inside of the media item called field media document, where we point to the file ID. And then we can use that later to decide which media item we want to use when updating the field. So the first step here is we get the file from the node. So here we have a field image, which is referencing a file. It's not a media item. And then we can get the entity, so the image or the file, using the entity. And then one other thing is you can also see we also do the load by properties, where we get the type article for the content type. Here we can see that we are now taking the file ID from the field image, and then we're using a load by property so we can search for that file from the media item. Then once we get the media item, we can then go take the media ID, and this is where we actually attach it to the new field for the media item. And then next is handling translations. So you can have a field that's translatable, and you want to make sure that you copy that data over as well. How you would do that is when you're iterating over the nodes that you want to update, you can call get translation languages, which will get the language, for example, like FR for French, EN for English, whatever you have set up. And then you can iterate over each of the language codes and then get the translated node. So that way, if you have a different value for French or for an English, then you can update it based off of that. And the last example we have is updating in batches. You can see at the start of the update, we calculate the total number of nodes that we're going to be updating, and at the bottom we count how much we've processed and the last one that we processed. So that way we don't use too much memory up if you have a lot of nodes, and then you can do them in batches. So some tips that we discovered when doing update hooks. Back up your database, especially in your local environment, because it's very helpful for testing update hooks when you can just very quickly export a database, run your update hooks, be like, oh my god, it didn't work, then re-import your database. And then even on, obviously on like servers and development environments, you want to back up your database as well, because stuff can happen. And it also makes it a lot faster for working with update hooks when you go to write them. Deploy non-destructive hooks first. So if you have a field that has data in it and you want to map that to a new field, deploy your update hooks, map it to the new field, and then that way, if something goes wrong or doesn't get mapped properly, then you still have that original data. So doing the cleanup at the end when you're happy with everything, so that way you don't get rid of data that you need. And check config exists before trying to remove it. That's one of the ways when you do an update hook, like you don't really necessarily know what environment you're in. So it's always good to check, oh, does this field exist? Does it have the data? If you're trying to remove config, checking if the config exists before trying to remove it. Because the last thing you want is to do a deployment, have half your update hooks run because one of them failed. And then logging the status of your updates. So just keeping messages saying this update hook completed, this one ran, this is what it did. And then that way when you do a deployment and you see the update hooks run, you can see the different update hooks and what they did. And you can see, okay, this changed, so I can check that. And making sure that everything worked properly. So now we can go into a little bit of a demo. Here I have a simple Drupal site up and running. We have two content types, basic page, article, but I'm just using a basic page. I did a simple example here where I put two text fields, first name and last name, and then a third text field called full name. And then here we have a media field, and then we have a document field. This is just referencing a file, and then this is the media item itself. So if we want to come over into here, into the update hooks themselves. Okay, so if we come into here with the update hooks, we can see we have our first update hook. This is where we're loading the files. And then we iterate over each file, and then we create the media items. And then we get the data and we put it in here. That's like the example that we did. And then we can see we have other update hooks as well. I will just comment them out to start off. And then we can run the first update hook here. So I'll go ahead and put a debugger on that, and then I'll open this up. And then if I run this command, and I call get, just gotta do one more thing. So here we can see what the schema version is of our module. So you can see we have our update hooks are underneath that number. And then as well, we can set the schema value if we want to rerun our update hooks using this command here, which I included in a PDF that I'll reference. So now if we go and run our debugger, okay, so here we run our debugger and we have our update hook running. And we'll run drush-updb. You see, here's the update hook. Do you want to run it? Yes. And then here we can have our debugger, and then we can look at our local variables to see what data we actually get. So we'll go ahead and step over it. So here we have the entity type manager. We get that object, and then here we get the node storage, and then here the bundle of the page, or the basic page is page, and then here you can see we get the node IDs. And you see here are the three different node IDs, 1, 2, and 3, and then here we load multiple nodes, and then here we can go through each node and see, did we get the node? And one of the things that's useful is that you can actually open up this node. You can go see what values it has, for example. So here you see node ID, line code, status, title. It could be useful for debugging, as you might want to see, like, okay, what data am I getting from here? So we can go through the different items. If we want to get the value, then we can call the get method on the node and then use the value here. So we step through this, we step through this, and then here we can set the value itself, and then we can save the node, and then we can print out the title of the node that we just updated. And then we'll go through that for each one of those nodes until we get to the end. And then we can hit play. So now we've updated the 3 basic pages, and we come into here. We can come and see that we now updated the full name and the last name based off of those 2 values. So now, if we go and we want to run the next update hook, we can uncomment that, save that, and then we go ahead and run that. So here we get the file storage, and then here we can get all the file IDs. So here are all the different file IDs for the files that we have in the site. And then here we can load the file objects, and then here we can get the actual MIME type. So I'll go ahead and put a breakpoint on here because not all of them are text files, just the examples I have. So here we have a file MIME of text plain, and then we can create our media item itself with the information that we get from there. So here we set all the values, we get the UID, the owner, so that way the user of the media item is still going to be the same as the file. We get the status, the created time, and then this field media document is a field on top of the media item itself, so we can reference the file using the target ID and then getting the ID from the file. And then we can save the object. And then we would do that for each one. So then I can go ahead and hit, and then let that finish. And then if we come back to the site, content, and then we can go to media, and you can see here are the different media items that we have and create it. So the next step, once we create the media items, is we're going to attach the items itself. So if we come over here and we look at this update hook, so here we have a couple different variables. So we have the content type of the media item we want to update. We have the field media, which is going to be the field on the content type itself that's going to reference the media. And then we have the bundle that we want to use. So in this case, we're making documents, and then the field that points to the file as we're going to check that file. This is called the field document. And then once we get all that set, we go and load the nodes, and then we can iterate over each of the node, and then we check if it has a value. And if it has a value, then we go and we get the file, we say that the file is set, and then we get the file name, and then we populate the information based off of that. And then here we can use the file ID, or sorry, the file name, to basically do a lookup to see the file that we're looking for. And then once we get that file, we can then go and attach it to the node, which is going to be a little further down here. So here we see we set the value, and we have the target ID, the media ID, and then the target type of the media. And then we can save that. So I just got to make sure that I commented it. DB, put a breakpoint on it. Go ahead and run the breakpoint. Okay, so here we can step through and we can see the values. Step through here. So here, this is where we get the nodes. In the bundle, it's going to be page. We step through over that, and then here we can iterate over each of the nodes. We check if we have a field file name, so field document. That's where the file is being added to. And then here we can go and get the actual entity if it exists. So now we have the file object here. And we can see the different values inside of here as well for debugging purposes. You have your file ID, the file name, and other things like that. So here we check, okay, it exists. Then we get the file name. This is the field that's going to be on the media item that we want to reference. And then here we do an actual search to see if we can find the media item. So in this case, we got the media ID, and then we can set the value on the field itself. So the field media is the field that's referencing the media item, and then we can set the target ID at 1 and then the target type of media. And then we go and we save the node. And then we can just run that through for the rest. So now when we come over here, we should be able to see, if I go to content, English, go ahead and edit that. And you can see now we have the media item referenced. So this could be useful because with the media item, you can have different displays for the media, and then you can use the core media module. So for example, if your site, you have a lot of files, one of the things you could do is add them to media items and replace that so you can automate some of that. Okay, so that is that one. And then here, if we scroll down, this is an example where we talk about dealing with translations. So here we have our setup, so the module name, the entity type manager, the node storage, and then the bundle itself. Then we're loading the node IDs, so we're not actually loading the node objects yet. So we're using the getQuery method. And then here, once we have the node IDs, we load the nodes. And then once we iterate over each of the node, we can then get the translation languages, which then we can look at and see the FR, the EN, and then we can see that we'll get the translated node, and then we'll get the value in French and in English. And then we have our little update over here saying that this node was updated from the translated title. So go ahead and run that. Okay, so here we see we have our update. We'll go ahead and run it. Click yes. So I'll close that. And then we'll walk through it, get the node storage, get the bundle. Here we get the node IDs, and we can go for debugging purposes. We can open this up and we can see the different IDs for the nodes. And then we can iterate over each of the nodes. Here we can get the translation languages. So that's going to be your French, English. Here you can see EN, FR, the different languages. And then here, one of the things that I would probably add as well is there's a method called has translation. So you can say if has translation, then go and try to get the translation for it. In this case, the translation exists already. So here we iterate through it, and then we get the language and then the lang code. So the lang code in this case is going to be EN, so we're getting the English translation. And then we do the same thing, we update our values, and then we go ahead and save that. And then for the next one here, we now get the French translation. So we step through here, and now we have the French node. And then we step through that, and then we can update the value for the French node, and then we go ahead and save that, and then we can log the messages. So if I go back to here, go to content, so go ahead and open up just do far, and you can see we have the translated text there, French and in English. So some of the other things I would mention when talking about debugging is it could be helpful to do a database export. So to do an example, we can do drush SQL dump result file, and then we can just give it a name of like var www html, and then backup to .sql. So then that way we can back up our database before running our updates. And then if we want to rerun our updates, we can go ahead and set the semantic version, and then we can also re-import the database that we want. So in this case, I could do drush SQL query, file, and then do var www.html start to, and then we can re-import the database, and then that will get our site back to the previous version. And then we can also set the version of it to rerun the update hooks, which is right there. Okay, so now we can rerun our update hooks just as we did before. And it's be helpful for testing and debugging, because then you can very quickly get back to the original state that you were in once you're running the update hooks. And one of the things I find very useful as well with update hooks is to run it through drush PHP first to see what you get and you're happy with the changes, and then you can put it in update hooks, because it's additional steps to then go and rerun an update hook every time, re-importing the database and setting the version and all that stuff. So for example, if we do like drush PHP, we can see we can do backslash Drupal and the type manager. I think it's like this. And then see we get the entity type manager here. And then we could do entity type manager, assign it to that, and then we get the different node storages. Entity type manager, get storage, node. And you see we get the different storages as well. So some of the things on this cheat sheet we talked about. We talked about the simple structure of an update hook, to be able to do a database dump, running update hooks, and also resetting your version number. So make sure to put the module name and the version number that you want to set it to. How to load your data, the different node storages and handles, and then also how to get the IDs instead of loading the actual objects themselves, and then loading multiple nodes. And then here we have the example of creating media items, and then handling translations, and just some ideas for deployment and tips. Some other stuff. So yeah, so I guess one of the other things I would say about this is that with update hooks versus migrations, like when you go and write a migration, like it takes a whole lot of time, because you're going and running through the entire site. So if it's just like a small specific change you want to do, you could do an update hook instead. Any questions? Yep.
So this could be definitely useful for something like if you have a field that you can't really change that field, if you have to change a machine name or change some structure about it, this would be useful that you can create a new field, transfer that data over, and then remove that field, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like we have it, like there's examples where there'll be something like really simple off, like it's like the size of the field, and then just running an update hook to copy data from one field to another gets around that issue. I've had to do like some weird stuff, like I had to do like database changes and update hooks before, but that was only because we just didn't know what environments it ran into. So if you have like, you know, very dynamic environments and a lot of environments going on, update hooks are really useful, because if I say, for example, I want to remove config, then when you know, you do a deployment removing config, which environment is that running on? Are you just deploying it to a specific environment? With update hooks, you can say, oh, does this config exist, and then removing it. So it just helps ensures that it gets run on all the different environments that you may have. And that's why in a specific scenario, I had to do a database change in an update hook was because the environments were dynamic and make sure it ran on the given environments. Okay. Yep.
So the similar concept for the entity reference, right? Like there's a paragraph you can create as a paragraph using the update hook, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because the whole idea with an update hook is that you have some sort of change that you need to make, but you only want it to run once. So that's the whole idea of like, if I go and I install a module, if I'm restructuring it and I want to use a different field, for example, well, what happens to all the people who are now using my module? Now when we do the update hook, we can restructure it so that way when you go and you download the module and you run the update hooks, you get those changes and you can use the new site because it just makes it more an easier pathway to upgrading. But the general idea is that it's just PHP code that you're running. So if you put in a module, one of the things that I really like to do is just running drush PHP and then running the specific command that you have. So for example, if you want to load a paragraph, you can run it here to make sure that you have the syntax right and that you're actually getting the paragraph before moving it over to the update hook. Because once you move it over to the update hook, you have the additional steps of making sure that these update hooks don't run and resetting your version of the module and then having something you may not want to run and then re-importing the database and all that stuff. So with doing the drush PHP, it's very quick to just say like, okay, how do I load a paragraph? Load the paragraph, see what data did you get, and then once you're happy with that, then move it over to an update hook.
For paragraph, for example, the data can be loaded not within Drupal, right? Because if I'm creating the new paragraph, I mean the source, right? Probably from other source.
I'm not sure about that.
If you're dealing with other sources, like outside of your existing Drupal site, you
Right.
probably
Like
want to
it
run a
says available.
migration. Yeah.
You have to
You
run.
would
Or-
run a migration. And you can migrate into paragraphs. So like you can make other database structures, or I don't know if you have like a CSV, what you're info in it.
There's
You
also
can
a
run migrations.
migrate default content.
Yes, there's.
Yeah, the maintainer's in the room for that one, so I had to shut him out.
Yeah, so if you're dealing with external sources, then you're probably going to look at migrations.
It makes sense, right? It's not an update. It's
Yeah.
active.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thanks.